I have never been happier to eat my words, I'll say that right from the get-go. As I think many people did, following the ending of Game of Thrones, I seriously doubted the fact that I'd ever return to the universe with basically any level of excitement. Sure, prequels wouldn't have anything to do with the interesting conclusion that was Season 8, but prequels themselves are usually pretty dicey as is since they are by default solved stories. Outliers like Better Call Saul definitely do exist, but that didn't have mountains of animosity against it. Would you have given it a shot if Breaking Bad ended with Walter just forgetting where he hid the money and returned to his life as a teacher? Probably not. So yes, trust me when I say that even after the show was announced, I was, at best, very cautiously a tiny bit interested. On top of that, I was a bit late to the Game of Thrones train as is, so I never even got around to reading the books. And so this entire story had essentially no pull aside from the name, which too was somewhat tarnished because of all the aforementioned Season 8 drama. Obviously D&D wouldn't be involved and my rational brain knew that, but that still didn't topple my general negativity toward the IP as a whole. And so, with the finale of Season 1 now rolling around, I thought more than enough time has passed for me to try to dissect how House of the Dragon pulled off something that I thought to be impossible. It has got me just as, if not more invested into its story than even early Game of Thrones itself. And all of that began with Episode 1, where I went in with no more than a passing interest of what the story might turn out to be. Though right away, I could feel it. It was almost uncanny in how distinctly different the tone was from Season 6 through 8 of the Thrones series. Again, I'd never read the books, but I did know that that's where the source material ended. Though watching the series for the first time, I feel like that transition between what was Martin's story and then D&D's story was never really as outwardly present. Looking back, it's definitely a pretty stark transformation, but because I'd consider myself to be a relatively casual fan back then, it took me a while to even notice it. But now, even halfway through Episode 1, this was classic Thrones. All the subtle social and political factors that seemed all but gone in the later season of Thrones were once again at play, and it always felt like we were just seconds away from everything imploding in classic Martin fashion. Though what honestly surprised me the most is how invested I immediately was about the actual Game of Thrones aspect of House of the Dragon. I am an absolute sucker for grand fantasy, so with Thrones, a very large part of my interest actually stemmed from the apocalyptic prophecies about the Night King and A Song of Ice and Fire. Of course, I was still invested in the politics of Westeros, but it was the grander scale story that was the thing that had me coming back each and every time. It was always this blooming, omnipresent threat that would throw all the power struggles completely upside down. But with House of the Dragon, sure, they did drop the whole Song of Ice and Fire prophecy, but right away, this was about the Targaryens and their battle for the throne. Plain and simple. The human conflicts, the power struggles, the backstabs, and the politics would be the main focus. And I, for one, honestly couldn't be happier. And something that I feel like captures all of that are, and hold on, I will try to explain, I promise this makes sense, the opening credits. When they first came up and the same Thrones opening started playing, I won't lie, as much as I loved the series, the bad taste of the ending was still in my mouth. But oh HBO, you cheeky people, with each and every passing episode, that faded away. And now we've reached the point that I once again never skip it and just find myself bopping along to the theme each and every week. Despite it feeling like a super silly thing to talk about, I feel like it does very neatly describe my sentiment about the IP and how House of the Dragon has already redeemed it so much. Hell, I'm even getting a weird temptation to go back and rewatch Thrones. If you told me that like 2 years ago, I would have called you mad. And of course, I can't talk about the appeal of it without bringing up the cast and crew behind it, which I think are straight up excellent. With so many franchises, it feels like they simply rely on existing brand power without caring for the actual quality of what they put out. But I can confidently say that with House of the Dragon, that is not the case. From the sets to the character designs and everything in between, quality-wise, this show is polished to a ridiculous degree. I think there's a reason why Martin himself said that Paddy's Viserys was better than his Viserys. This cast, so far at least, has nailed every bit of Thrones in my book. especially with the recast that have had to take place as a result of the time skips. And one thing that I find speaks to how well that is executed is how some of these episodes throw us right into the thick of it without ever explicitly saying who these characters even are. They are so well outlined that the writers can afford to explain very little and have the viewers themselves piece it together. With how many shows are nowadays, it's just such a nice breath of fresh air when it respects the audience's intelligence and doesn't feel like it needs to spoon-feed every bit of information to us. And that is coming from me, someone who has more than likely missed countless details of foreshadowing and other smaller prophecies that are sprinkled throughout these early episodes. Allowing us to simply step into this world as an observer or almost like a fly on the wall, I just can't help but get enthralled into the world exactly because I don't know everything. It does come with massive risks of making these sorts of transitions very jarring, especially in a show that spans like 20 years in universe. But to me, that's just another feather in its cap. The fact that with each and every one of these time skips, I'm just thrown right into the deep end wondering about how all of these social dynamics have changed has certainly been one of my favorite aspects of the show. Probably my hottest take about this entire thing is that I was just as invested into House of the Dragon by the end of episode 1 as I was with that event in the season 1 finale of Thrones. And speaking of which, I absolutely adore how ridiculously large-scale the story is, while still being extremely narrowly focused on the Targaryens and the struggle for the throne. What I mean by that is that the story, again, spans literal decades with children being born, dying, new children popping up, relationships constantly changing, and so on. Yet still, we are only concerned with a small list of core characters, which allows for incredibly engaging storytelling where we explore many aspects of those same characters. A major problem with Thrones in its later seasons is that it wanted to tell a massive story with many moving pieces, but the problem is, the world was just as huge. And because they operated with a somewhat fixed time period until the long night set in, teleportation started to become the norm. The world of Game of Thrones felt lost because the true scale of it was gone. Traveling was no longer a thing, everybody just teleported all over the place. With House of the Dragon, on the other hand, that is entirely flipped on its head. Things take time, a lot of time in fact. At this point, 5-year time skips are the norm, because as long as the writers have done their job and built up the characters and their motivations, they can afford to simply skip forward to see how all of that has progressed throughout these many years. A major criticism for the last season of Game of Thrones was how rushed the events felt, and that is exactly it. House of the Dragon takes its sweet time while never lingering in one place in time for too long. For us, the world is constantly changing, but the time frame during which it happens allows for so much more change than was ever possible with Thrones. And again, because the story is so narrowly focused, the character dynamics we see stem from those decades of animosity are simply excellent. Things like us seeing the slow and brutal decline of Viserys' health, things like Rhaenyra returning to King's Landing only to find it drastically different because of Alicent's increasing control, all of them stem from the very long time span and seem natural as a result. So, with all that said, I for one couldn't be more excited to see the inevitable bloody battle that breaks out for the throne, and how the House of the Dragon holds against the other families trying to get a piece of it for themselves. Obviously, the very large time jumps are likely coming to an end relatively soon as things reach a boiling point, but with how much tension between Alicent and Rhaenyra has been cooked up, from them being best friends in their childhood to them finally coming to blows and spilling their first blood, I think we are headed towards some incredible stories of political intrigue, countless backstabs, many a dragon, and of course, a lot of brutality. Fact of the matter is, if this is the quality of the shows that the Throne franchise plans to create in the future, I think they've pulled me right back in, and that is something I thought they'd never do again. And in a broader sense, thank you so much HBO for having the confidence in the show to just put out one episode and let people make up their minds for themselves. It would have been so much easier for them just to dump the entire first season and use that as a crutch to get people back into the world of Thrones. But they didn't. They stuck to their guns and maintained the show as their usual one-per-week release. which, if you've seen any of my content before, is exactly what I think every other show in the industry should do. Please HBO, whatever you do, never switch to a binge release. This show deserves to be watched weekly. And thank you so much for reigniting all of those weekly conversations among my friends about the latest episodes. I genuinely could not be happier to have been wrong, and man, does it feel good to be back in Westeros. So, if you have somehow watched till the end of this video and haven't watched House of the Dragon, do yourself a favor and get in early. This show really is something special and you do not want to miss it. And that's the video. Bit of an impromptu one, but I've been really meaning to talk about House of the Dragon, so this is my little outlet for doing that. I'd absolutely love to delve into it even more with Season 2 potentially, but I guess only time will tell. But with that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!